Now, what about moisture content? Is there a rule of thumb that you like to maintain moisture, like the squeeze test or?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that there was a question that came up. I did see your question. I'll answer Leighton's first here. So, well, we're talking about worms and we're talking about compost. So with regular compost, I'm wanting that at like 50 to 60% moisture, whereas a worm farm, that can also depend, but usually for vermicompost, you want to keep that around 70 to 80% moisture. So heavier on the moisture, because the more moisture you have, the more microorganisms you're going to have. And so then the more microorganisms you have, then you're going to have a healthier worm population as well. The problem comes into play is that people are wanting to screen out vermicompost or regular compost, and then you've got that moisture in there. And then for breeding worms, it's even more than that. You want like almost 90% soupy. They really like a lot of water for breeding environments.
Well, how the hell do you keep that from going anaerobic? Do you add a lot of like structure to it, or?
It's right at the point. I don't really breed worms, but yeah, it's really a fine line between going anaerobic and it's just, it would be like where you would squeeze it, and right as you start to squeeze it, it start to have water come out. But other than that, you don't have like standing water.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So there would be a lot about the bedding. The bedding would be critical in that.
Right. Yeah. The material for bedding. Yep.
Yeah, because I talk a lot about structure and compost. Like basically the compost I'm making now are all diverted waste streams. So like one of them is cocoa coir plugs from an organic lettuce factory in LA, spent mushroom substrate from Smallhold in LA. And then there's this kiln dried lumber they recycle, and they take the kiln dried lumber, grind it, and make this mulch that they then dye in green, black, red, and brown for different clients. But they get rid of all the fines. And those fines are fucking amazing fungal food. Because they're kiln dried, they act like little sponges when they get in water. They just soak it up.
Right.
And they provide that structure because they don't compress real easy. Whereas the spent mushroom substrate, that shit compacts like fucking nobody's business. Like it can be bone dry and it's totally anaerobic. It stinks like hell. The core plugs work really great. The core fines, because they like to screen it, and then they sell the core fines to blend into their soil mixes as a source of potassium. That works great for their end, but I don't want the fines. I want the coarse shit. Then there's GOM, and there's GOM, coarse, 1 inch minus, and 3/8 minus. So the 3/8 minus stuff sucks because it's just too fine. Whereas the 1 inch minus is a little bit too heavy. So I usually get the, I think it's 1.5 inches, 3/4, 3/8. So I get the 3/4, which is coarse enough to provide structure so that the compost won't collapse. But then as soon as I get that just a little bit out of whack, now I can't fucking get the water to hold it. So it's tricky to get that, to get the appropriate structure, but have enough of the fines and the other materials that hold that moisture. And, just trying to maintain 50, 60 is out here in California is a bitch because you've got the dry, the winds, and the high UVs. So it's been a big learning curve, dude. Back east, oh man, I could knock it out of the park every compost pile I made. Out here, it took me probably 3 months to play with all these different ingredients. First of all, to figure out which ones I wanted to use, and then second, on which ratios. And then once I got that formulated, then it was like, okay, windrow, no, that doesn't work. I started making brownies, so it was only 2 feet deep but wide and a flat top, so that it would hold the moisture. That worked great, but the only problem is the top 4 to 6 inches would dry out, and so I'd only get this like maybe 12-inch layer of really good shit, because obviously the bottom would again go anaerobic, the top would go hydrophobic, so I would lose almost 50% of everything I made to the elements. So yeah, it's definitely a lot more of a challenge out here than back east for sure. And let's take a couple more questions here. There you go.
Yeah. How deep should you keep your bedding on top?
I'm guessing this means for a worm bin.
Yep.
It's gonna be dependent upon the management style of bed that you have, but for most people who are doing like a small bin system, really just anywhere from 1 to 3 inches. If you're doing a worm bin, it's generally best to add small layers of food and bedding at once in like 1/2 inch to 1 inch layers. So come in and feed a layer that's about that big. Let your worms break it down over 3 or 4 days, and then come back and feed them some more.
So lasagna style. So layer of food, layer of bedding.
If you're doing it that way, yeah. I mean, I'm feeding pre-compost, so I'm just dumping in a layer of bedding. But yeah, if you're putting in both greens and browns, you could do like kind of mix it up a bit and then put that layer in there. Yeah.
Got you. Because you're pre-digesting your food into your compost, into your bedding is your food source.
Correct. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Or even in people don't always understand that when you're feeding a worm bin, you're feeding browns and greens, but no matter what it is, it's all food for worms.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's best to feed in small amounts so then that you're keeping it aerobic. If you